Hey, welcome everyone to the June Psychosomatic Conversations. And the question that we've put up today is, why would psychosomatics assist me as a student or as a client? And several of the people that are here with us today are already very well versed with psychosomatics. But for some of you that will be watching this recording, this will be rather new to you. So you'll get to hear me, and I've invited Lee Mill. Lee, if you just want to wave. Lee is based in WA, and she is both a student of psychosomatics. She's a practitioner, so she's going to be sharing with us some of her insights as well. So Lee, thank you for joining as well today.
Thanks.
Okay. So some people may be even unfamiliar with the wording of psychosomatics and what that actually means. So when we're taking and breaking the word down, psyche is the mind, soma is the body. And the way that the psychosomatic is different from some of the other trainings is that it is the mind-body connection. So we're not just looking at the emotions, we're not just looking at the intellect, we're taking a look at the somatic response. And the training itself in Australia was created by Herman Mueller. So Herman Mueller, he basically started his journey through his entire life, but in his 50s, he started to put together the psychosomatic therapy process. And his earlier experience, he was part of a team of people that were charged with the responsibility of taking young kids that had been institutionalized and were not living a very nice life at all. You know, some of them were hardly getting out of bed. And the formula that they created for these kids was a safe environment, new opportunities to learn skills, and to be supported through that learning. And he basically said that the training itself that these kids had, or the experience that these kids had, meant that they literally changed their lives and went into assisted care living. So with that experience and with the transformation of these young kids, he thought that what would it be like if I took this process and put in some of the same elements: safety, education, exploration, and weaving into that things like posture, breathing, self-regulation, recognizing default patterns and where you go within yourself. So combining this into a training, he started the psychosomatic therapy process in Australia. And whilst initially he had people that had trauma backgrounds, it wasn't very long before he had a lot of people coming to him and saying, we need to learn this skill. We want to incorporate this with our clients. We see the benefit of it. And in this process, this is when he basically became, with his wife, Mari Mueller, founders of the Psychosomatic Therapy College and a registered training organization. So Herman passed away in 2017. He's had countless trainings, students, teachers come through the process. So his legacy continues with everyone else that continues on that pathway of becoming practitioners and teachers. And yet I would say it's still in its infancy. And what I mean with that is, traditionally people have considered psychosomatic related to when they go to a doctor and the doctor says, you know, there's nothing wrong with you. We've done the bloods, we've done the tests, it's psychosomatic. And in some respects, that is also true of the psychosomatic aspect is true. When they say it's all in the mind, what they really mean is it's actually in the emotional component that gets stored in the body. There's nothing physically wrong with you at this stage, but because you've got suppressed emotions, you're not used to, well, they're basically storing them in the body. That becomes pain, body tensions. So what we start to see with certain people that will come to us as psychosomatic therapists, they'll be wanting to take a look at what's occurring in their body. So in psychosomatics, we're looking at not just the body, we're learning how to take a look at the different personalities, and we recognize this in many different ways through the face, through the hands, the feet, the body shapes, feet positions. They all tell us something about the person and how that person engages in life, how they experience others. So face and body reading is not just a therapy. It's not just related to health. It can be also used as a tool to work out the strengths and challenges that a person may have. And one of the things I just love about face reading, body reading, when you start to help clients take a look at areas where either they require some encouragement with, and I often refer to these as challenges. I recognize that for many people, their greatest gifts in life are going to come through their challenges. So as we start to really recognize what may be required to support some of those challenges and what would it look like if the person was performing at their best, we start to get a really beautiful bridge of, if you're out of balance, how can I start to return to balance? So relationships, whether that's couples, whether it's family dynamics, taking a look at the activation points, what triggers you, building teams, establishing rapport, and most importantly, hearing clients from their perspective. We're going to go a little bit more into this, but Lee, I might just invite you at this stage, if that's okay. I'm just going to pin you on the screen.
Yeah, sure.
It's been many, many years since I've met you. Had the pleasure of meeting you. And so is it okay just to share with us today just a little bit about your personal experience and how you work with your clients with some of the psychosomatic principles?
Sure, sure. Thanks everyone for joining in. Yeah, so my background is initially as a hypnotherapist, psychotherapist, and then I studied psychology, and I've been working quite extensively over the last couple of years in domestic violence, sexual assault. So I've had a lot of trauma presentations, and now I'm in private practice, working with mostly traumatized clients, but also grief and loss. And you don't normally go to a psychologist unless there's something wrong. So working with clients initially, when they come into the room, you'll have, I guess you have to use both a evidence-based scientific perspective when you're looking at clients, and then also the holistic perspective, which is the psychosomatic. So I draw on both, and I find that from a professional stance, yes, people are expecting as a psychologist that you'd work at a certain level, but then there's the human aspect, and the psychosomatics really, really helps you make that really strong connection with your client. An example of that would be a client who has been referred by a GP for grief and loss. Say she's lost her husband, walks in, sits down, head down, eyes down, shoulders forward, hunched over, chest pulled back. You may ask questions, to get your initial information from the client, but maybe the information is not forthcoming because to even talk about her situation is a bit overwhelming. But then when you start saying something, a simple sentence like, I can see how much the loss of your husband has impacted you, because you're shocked from a psychosomatic perspective, your head's down, shoulders are over, chest is back, armoring, contracted, your energy is really contracted, and straight away they'll look at you with a stunned kind of look on their face. How did you know that? Well, the body's telling you that. So that's a really good way of getting into a conversation. And then also you might talk about another aspect of psychosomatics is looking at their numerology. I always use numerology in sessions with clients, and I just pull little aspects out, not too much too soon, but just little aspects. So one thing that I've noticed with a lot of sexual assault, domestic violence is, and especially clients coming to me with really strong reactivity to, you know, things going on around them. So they're emotionally overwhelmed. Usually a lot of them have 3 in the numerology. And I don't know if Belinda has already explained that with psychosomatics and the numerology, you're taking their birth date and you're adding up the numbers, and then you're coming up with what the numbers add up to as a personality number and then a soul number. And I usually pull out, say, the 3, and then I explain the reason why they're so emotionally reactive and empathic, because that seems to be the buzzword when it comes to therapy, is they're absorbing a lot of the energy from people around them, and they don't know how to discern what's theirs and what other people's energy is, and explaining to them that we all have a what they call scientifically as a peripersonal space. In other words, the energetic layers around us, where neuroceptively our nervous system is picking up energy. So I bring in some of the evidence base into it, as well as the holistic, so it doesn't sound too woo-woo. And then they kind of are still listening. And then I say the reason why, you know, you're naturally attuned from your energy, your vibration, your ability, your neuroceptive ability to really absorb a lot of energy and environment around you, because your peripersonal space allows that. And yeah, a sense of overwhelm, and then I will say something positive to make them fit, because usually what happens is the breeze, the emotional overload, they may feel that they don't trust their body anymore. It's their enemy, because they get too overwhelmed by what's happening to them. So when I explain to them, you're very lucky, what a beautiful gift you have to be able to read that energy. Up till now, you may not have realized that that's a gift, but in days gone by, what research has found is that people with that ability, they would put them on the periphery of the tribe, and they would be the ones that, if there were people coming in from neighboring tribes, they would immediately pick up whether the intent, in other words, the energetic information going out to people around them, was of good intent or bad intent. So how lucky are you to have a gift like that? And immediately them thinking that, what is wrong with me? I'm broken. I'm just so emotional and overreactive, suddenly becomes this amazing ability that they have. So pulling in both the, you know, the evidence base and the psychosomatic, and blending them together, integrating them, can really, really help when it comes to therapy. So that's just an example. And then, I mean, I can go through each of the different numerology and just name different things. So
that's good. Can you tell me, do you use any face reading with your clients?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, like if you're talking to a client and they sort of,
I might just explain face reading just before I get you to come back and say, is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so as we're taking a look at face reading, you're starting to look at the blueprint of a personality. So the face shape that people have different characteristics, and how that's going to show up in their behaviors, their attitudes, how they process information. The right side of the face is the mask that we develop in order to feel safe and protected. So as we're taking a look at the differences between the right and the left, we start to meet, who do I need to be to fit into the world versus how am I experiencing my world? And so those shifts can be really, really major. We take a look to see if the person has sharp features, whether they're more softer, and that will influence the way that they present themselves out into the world. The certain facial features will start to change with habitual emotional patterns. So when we see someone doing a micro expression, from Paul Ekman's work that he noticed, when we see the micro expressions, they're in the moment, they happen really fast. It could be like the shock, or it could be being angry, with the brows coming together. But what we're looking for in psychosomatics is those long-term emotional expressions that start to change some of the features. And as we then work with the person, some of those expressions can be released because there are holding patterns that go throughout the whole body. And one of the beautiful things when working with clients from a psychosomatic perspective is if a pattern is showing up in the face or the body, and it's showing up 2 or 3 or 4 times, those patterns magnify each time that you see it in a different place. So if the client may not relate to what you are asking as a question, or give you the response that you with something you're actually seeing in their body, you know that they've either heard you incorrectly or that they relate to the words differently, and to stay on track with what you're seeing. And it's one of the principles of psychosomatics. If it's showing in the face and the body, it is in the embodied form. So we need to start to actually change the awareness of how that could be. And when you stay true to it, it's phenomenal. And it's one of the reasons why I think a lot of people that are attracted to this work are professionals in their own right, but they're starting to see if they learn how to read the messages from the body, then they're getting a different way in which to engage with the clients. So on that, Lee, I'm just going to come back to you for a second. I was going to pin you again. So on face reading, how do you work with your clients?
I was gonna mention even from when they walk in the door, and like if their heels are coming down and they're heel grabbing and their toes are coming up in the air, something as simple as that, you can notice that as they're coming in. So heel grabbing would be, desperately trying to ground themselves and their toes coming up in the air out. You might have a client that is constantly in their head or dissociating all the time as well. And so the face, even as you're talking to them, and they might have beautiful big eyes, but then they might have some little drooping of the eyes. So they might be getting a bit overwhelmed with emotional stuff. Or they might have a big space, like I've got a big space here. So even saying something to them like, I notice that, when I talk to you, it may take a little while for you to get that information and then really place it in the world before it can make sense to you, is what this space means. And even if you're talking to someone and their eyebrows are straight, it's got to talk them into a logical, progressive way rather than all over the place, because they may not have that flexibility. And then if you marry that with the shape of their face and there's more of an oval, yes, they're very much a flexible thinker. Or maybe you might notice, bits of their ear where they trust their gut, or maybe they don't. Or even their ear shape, is it round and is it their flexibility there, or is it more straight, rigid, linear, direct in the way you address people? So, and even like, is there redness here? Is there anger going on? Is there personality issues going on? Because this is where the personality and the anger and the energy and the trust sit within the nose. And this, if there's hurt, is there the dark under the eye? Is there the drooping? What's the texture of the skin? And even pointing out their cheek placement. They got nice high cheekbones. I can see you're a natural leader.
Yeah.
And even if they don't have the confidence, it's like, what's in your bone structure? It's there. It's part of you. Yeah.
That's great. I'll come back to you again later. With what Lee is sharing as well in terms of the different parts that we can recognize, sometimes even in a health perspective, looking at the face and looking at how a person engages is really significant. An example of that is somebody with a tiny chin and a very strong face. So wide mental zone, which is the forehead, across the cheekbones, really wide, strong jaw, little chin. When I look at a personality that has this look, they're quite often predisposed towards chronic fatigue. And the reason being is that the chin being somewhat smaller it's like a really fine instrument, and it needs to be taken care of. So the nervous system is actually heightened in those people, and that ability to sense is very strong as well. But when we have that smaller chin, the person can override their nervous system. And they usually are aware that they're doing it as well. It's like they're exhausted, but they have the capacity to keep on pushing. And so when we notice those sorts of things within the personality type, then we can get them to be with themselves in a different way. And there are certain patterns that we start to notice in the body. And one of them in psychosomatics relates to breathing. We've talked briefly about posture, and the posture is incredibly important, as with the foot placement. But taking a look at how people breathe is significant in terms of creating a resource that is available for every single person on the planet who is alive, and it is free. Yeah. As we breathe in and we change our posture, we're now getting to connect with ourselves in a different way. So in psychosomatics, we learn how to recognize the patterns of fight and flight, freeze and fawn, and how they actually show up in the physical form. And just with that, I'd like to invite you into a little bit of a somatic process. So I'd like you to put your feet onto the ground. You might need to shuffle a little bit further up in your chair, just so you're nicely positioned with your feet on the ground. And as you're breathing, I don't want you to change anything at all in your breath. I would just like you to notice, how are you breathing at this moment? Is it high? Is it shallow? Just notice. And now I'd like to invite you to consider what parts of your body are moving with your breath without changing anything. So as you notice what parts are moving, I'd like you to invite your breath just down towards the back of your neck, into your shoulder area, and see what it would be like if your breath could assist the movement of that part. Now coming into the back of the thoracic, could you invite your thoracic to move with your breath? And just to be aware of whether or not your body wants to play along with this or what your body's doing. And just take a few breaths in and out. And as you're doing this, do you notice any difference with now the front of your chest and whether it's moving? Now I'd like to invite that breath slightly down further into your spine. So coming into the sacral lumbar area, could you invite your breath into that part of the body and notice if you can make this area move ever so slightly. If someone was sitting next to you, they would not notice this movement. It is very, very subtle. And on the next breath, I'd like you to gently, very, very gently, push your feet into the ground, whilst you take that breath in. You might notice the activation of the quads and just release and notice. And again, just pushing gently into the ground. Take a nice big breath in. Just notice if there's any difference in how you're breathing. And on this last time, we're going to come into the coccyx. And again, you can press into the ground. Notice the coccyx move. You might notice an elongation of your spine. And just to relax. Letting that fully go in between breaths. Now, if you could bring the awareness round to the pelvis bowl. And to notice now, are you breathing into your body any differently to when you first started? Could I ask for a couple of people just to either put in the chat or maybe comment on anything that they're noticing different from when you first became aware of your breath? Thank you, Linda.
So what I noticed was when I first started breathing, that was just quite shallow, but really just in my chest. And the rest of my body was quite stiff. And so at the deeper breaths, I just felt like my shoulders dropped back, my chest opened up, and just felt a lot softer.
Beautiful. Thank you, Linda. Yeah, and it's amazing how quickly that energy can change in a short space of time, right? Thank you. And we have in the chat, deeper breaths. Great. Bringing conscious thought and breath at the same time feels like the whole body is breathing. Thanks, Lou. Yeah. So throughout sessions, whether they are client sessions, any client, more awareness of self. Thank you, Jackie. Any client that is coming in with anxiety or depression, they are not going to be breathing properly. I have never, in the years of doing psychosomatic practice, had a client with anxiety and depression that is actually breathing well. But there's something very special in the formulation of the psychosomatic training and the therapy itself. The education process is really important. And it's a really important part to releasing trauma as well. Because somebody's saying to you, hey, look, you're not breathing properly. Let's do this technique and just, you just need to change the way that you breathe, is somewhat unhelpful for the client. And when you're taking a look at that uncomfortability, you need to get them to become aware of how they're being to themselves and what's actually occurring with the minimalistic breath that's coming in. So as they can associate it with a stress pattern, that they're actually then learning skills of how do I stay with myself whilst recognizing a part of me is distressed. And this witnessing is a very important part of psychosomatics as well. And obviously in the full training, it's 12 days. We're in a very, very safe space to create the exploration of safety in the body. And once we create that safe platform and a person feels safe, they're able to explore very differently some of their traditional activations and triggers. So that's all part of it. So it's not just the education of how do I read the physical tissue, how do I look at the posture, but it's creating a holistic experience of what is your mind and your body actually doing in this moment. And I loved the example that Lee gave before. She's just starting to recognize the sensitivities and recognizing how that's going to show up for a client so they can also recognize that for themselves. Because it's not about us recognizing it. it's about the client learning how to recognize that for themselves as well. So I remember speaking with Herman many years ago, and I was asking him about some of the areas of how we brought the course together. And obviously the left brain and the right brain is something that we look at a lot, because for us, we're taking a look at the thought form becoming form. So thoughts become form, and they actually become part of the physical form as well. So as we're reading the left side of the body and the right side of the body, we're starting to look at the differences in how the tissue is laid down. We're starting to look at some of the attitudes that reside in the muscles and the tension. So we're looking at both sides to get an understanding of perspective of how that person balances their masculine and feminine energies. And we refer to it in psychosomatics as the masculine and feminine. But if you are wanting a more logical, practical terminology, you might go mind and emotions. Does my mind have a different story to my emotions? And for many people, the answer to that question is going to be absolutely. The mind likes to understand, and particularly the left side brain, it likes to understand. It likes to create logic and like being rational, practicality, and it will often justify situations. So the justification could look like, yeah, my childhood wasn't very good, but I know that they love me. And they had a really hard upbringing from their parents, so they didn't have the skills to love me the way that I needed to receive their love. And as you're looking at the body, you're seeing lots and lots of stored emotions and suppression of emotions, but you're hearing a calm, rational, quite peaceful mind. And this is where sometimes the pain is going to show up in the body, because the rationalization of what's occurred leaves the body with nowhere to go. It's almost it doesn't quite make the body wrong, but it's like we're no longer able to listen to the body because the rational mind has locked us out. And one of the techniques that I also use when I'm working with clients is, because I usually find people when I ask this question, they respond very fast back. They'll just go, yeah, my parents were, they're really great. They love me. I know they love me. Sometimes the voice pitch is fast and they haven't even had like 2 seconds to process. So I start to recognize that as a pattern. So I just get them to breathe, and I'm hearing what your mind is saying. Can I just get you to check into your body and ask your body if your body's having the same response as your mind? And maybe that's going to be a yes, but more often than not, the client will actually burst into tears. Yeah, because their body's having a very different experience, and the body remembers things from different ages. So the younger versions of us can hold on to memories and hurts and feel very, very unhurt. And this is why we get messages from the body to try to deal with some of the hurts that are historical. And as we work with those younger parts of ourselves, they can also come through and be healed. Yeah, because you're not pushing them away. You're actually just simply allowing them to be. We also talk in psychosomatics about doing emotions well. So if you're feeling sad, it's like, do sad well. And a client will maybe ask, what does that mean? And it's like, well, if the emotion is like a child and you had a child in your presence and the child was sad, yeah, what would you do with that child? And I'll go, oh, I would maybe give them a hug, spend some time with them. And it's like, so now if you reflect when you're sad, how do you be with the sad part of you? And most of the time it's going to be, I just want that part to go. Like that part just isn't allowed to have a presence. Or there's a feeling of having to humor that part into being happy. but actually not being with the part that's actually a little bit sad. And our emotions are very similar to children. Often when we look at them, we are afraid of them because we don't know what to do with them. But as you learn how to hold that space for them and just to hang with them, then the emotions pass through rather than being pushed down, suppressed. And this is not just sad. This is anxious, this is anger, this is frustration. Some people are so terrified of their emotions. And also, as an example, when they were depressed when they were in their 20s and they couldn't cope, as their body starts to give them signals at their 40s and 50s, there can be a total fear of, and what if I go back to how I was within my 20s when I couldn't cope? And the truth is that in those decades between, the person has now got resources. So it becomes the fear of the emotion and the previous response rather than the ability to be resourced and work through it. And they're all things that we work with. Okay. Okay, so face reading is a small part of the psychosomatics. It's an important part. As I mentioned previously, we're taking a look at not just the chakra flow, but we are also looking at the right and left, where a person spends more of their time. You'll notice someone who's very emotional will have a very, very large region between under their eyebrow to the tip of the nose. Someone who spends a lot of time in their mind, their forehead is going to be very large. For younger kids, that's like the upstairs playground. They can have a great time just in their mind rather than going out into the playground. And for someone who's got a very large physical zone, which goes from the tip of the nose down to the chin, they're very physically orientated, hands-on. And this tells us a lot about not only how a person likes to spend their time, but areas of strength and resilience and resourcefulness that they have in any situation. So as an example, in terms of a sales area, if you're looking at, again, at someone with a very large forehead, they like to be part of the decision-making process. So if you don't involve them in the decision-making process, they're not going to get job satisfaction. So you can bring this in many different ways in a session. I hate my job. Let's take a look at how do you currently experience your job? It doesn't always have to be deep trauma. It can just be unhappiness that we see clients. The masks show up not only in the face, but the armoring of the body in terms of the tissue. We're looking at the voice tone. We're looking at, as Lee mentioned, the shoulders being rolled forward, what the stance is like. And throughout that, we're looking at changing some of the awareness around us. We've mentioned the emotional component to illness. And this pretty much goes, there is always an emotional component to illness. So as we get to understand our body more and no longer be afraid of it, but to start to really hone into listening to its messages, we're already being given information of what is required for our healing. And the body is constantly regenerating itself. So as we change our attitudes and our beliefs, we're opening up that possibility for changing in our health as well. There are certain emotional patterns, as I mentioned, that change the physical form. So when you're working with a client and they've got suppression of emotions, we are looking at things like these red, deep lines that come through a habitual frown. And if you were to put this face on, bring the eyebrows down, bring them together, and feel into the sensation in your body, you'll notice the intensity of the mind. As we notice that the lips have been brought in, we notice that this person has for a long time felt he cannot speak. So by inviting a conversation, by just recognizing this pattern, we now have questions that we could ask as a practitioner to this client based on what we're already seeing. This gentleman also has some patterns showing up as fear patterns that come from childhood. So if he turned up and said he had a relationship problem with his partner currently, we're able to read in his face, even just by looking at his ears, the mouth and the difference in the nose formation of some childhood patterns that are still active for him. So the problem is not going to be his current relationship. It's going to be his historical relationships. You'll notice in the previous picture, we've got eyebrows and eyes that are really close together. This is a sign of a fast thinker. Whereas when we have this beautiful gap, this is someone who needs time to process information. So just knowing that, we're going to interact just with that one comment. We're going to interact with these people differently. I mentioned previously about the left and the rights and how in psychosomatics we utilize and work with photos. You might notice at quick glance that there's several things that are different between left and right with this gentleman. And as people meet us, they meet our right side, not our left. So our right is the mask we create, and the left-hand side is our internal world. So when we look at the personalities that present between two rights and two lefts, we might notice that we would treat these people differently. And this is part of the journey of what we teach you how to do as well in psychosomatics. This also starts at quite a young age. So you might take a look as a teacher and go, how would I treat this child if he was in my class? He's 15 in this photo. How would I treat him? And if this boy was in my class, would I treat him any differently? And for most people looking at these photos, they'll see this one looks much younger than the boy that we saw earlier. So what does that mean for him? He's presenting on his right side, the public face, stronger and tougher than he feels on his inside. There's something that is really difficult for people when they have this experience. They often will feel unseen by people that tell them how strong and confident they are. Yeah, because it's not their feeling on the inside. So the photos can work with us to support what we do with them. 2 years later, he's looking like triplets in these 3 photos. His emotional intelligence has caught up. How he's feeling is now matching his outside world. And again, this is one of the most amazing things within psychosomatics, that the face and the body change as your internal environment changes. So there we got the before and afters, and you can see just how much that change has taken place. So I mentioned before about the safety, and I've just put down a couple of comments here. But if we've never been shown it, we may not know how to access it. If we haven't been shown it, if we have been shown it, but the environment hasn't been safe to explore, we may reject it. We may reject it if we don't feel safe, regardless of the environment. We know we are safe, but that can be intellectual and the body can have a different dialogue. So that brings into the historical safety. Gaining understanding through the educational process, how to recognize your own triggers, both the root of the actual trigger or activation, but also the route it takes. So I've spelled that R-O-U-T-E, because there is a pathway that it actually takes, and we'll start to recognize that pathway. As we start to recognize that pathway, we can recognize some ages. So with the psychosomatic assistance, where have I gone? What are my default coping patterns? And as we learn those and befriend those, then we get to change them. Another key area for me, I always have clients working on this, exploring their internal dialogue and how it supports them. So when we're taking a look at some of this, and even like triggers, you might sort of go, well, what would be a trigger? But for me, a trigger is anything at all where there is an over-activation, because these triggers can often suppress people from speaking up. They've got so much suppressed emotions that in the moment they know that they're not able to speak, because if they did, they would have the potential to annihilate a person. So that's one example of how a trigger might take place. Yeah, they just made a comment about my code. I feel like I want to, hit them. So it's like goes down even further. So these are some of the areas that we're looking at. Mara, is it okay to invite you to have a few words?
Of course.
Thank you. So I've had the privilege also of teaching Mara many, many, many years ago, and you work very specifically with your kids. Would you be able to share anything about that or your personal insights on?
Well, I'm a mum of 5 beautiful special needs children with many, many quirks. And I'm also there, we also have them for homeschooling. So we use psychosomatics every day. So it's like you become you become so much more aware and be able to pick up your observations go through the roof. From the way they wake up in the morning, how are they walking, what are they doing, to what words they choose to use, to how they represent themselves. It gives me a heads up for the day, but also throughout the day, I use it to help empower them so they can recognize their strengths and their challenges just through day-to-day activities. Like even when the children do group activities or meet other people in the park, they've got little tells that they know if another child has a really big emotional zone, I can go to them and I'm safe. Whereas I've got another child who likes to sit and be nice and quiet. So he's looking for somebody with a large mental zone. So he can just sit there, be separate, and still be able to fit in. So these are different things that even the children use and they've learnt when we're out of the house. But also they do it on their siblings. So it's like a fun game. It's like, now you've got this, so that means this. Or had a child who goes up to people and says, you act before you think, and then walk away. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. But we don't always say it. We don't know them. So it's a beautiful, amazing experience that is benefiting the children every day. It's and it's really, really good to be so aware and to be able to pick up on all those small things. So I think it's great. It's just something that rolls into your day to day and you find that you're doing it even without thinking about it. And it's beautiful to see the knock-on effect to help give my children confidence. And then they share that with other people. And it's just wonderful. I love it.
Mara, thank you. Whilst we're here, Cynthia, do you want to share any ways in which you use psychosomatics with clients or people that you interact with?
Thank you, Linda. I appreciate the invitation. I've been using psychosomatics daily for most of my time with it. I started in 2007, and like Mara was saying, it becomes an everyday aspect of yourself where you see someone walking down the street, foot point is key. And even though you can't approach them, your heart reaches out towards them, that you do wish for them to have a different aspect of life. And just because we have the awareness doesn't mean that my heart's heavy in that. I'd love to be able to make a big difference in everybody's world, but we are aware that everyone is on their own path, as we are all here today, that we have this opportunity to work with other people. Yet the biggest impact is how we relate by seeing them. How are we within our own body? And that has been my biggest takeaway, is when I'm going through something, yes, a full moon's summer solstice or winter solstice for you right now, is that there's an energy shift, but what's happening within our my body. Numerology, another major thing, listening to what you're speaking about here, is that I've studied that as well. And it's such a huge component When I hear somebody's birthday or I hear of somebody's passing, I'm quickly to go check those aspects out to see what kind of day are they in when they're born versus when they pass. Their name, the numbers vibrate daily. And as much as psychosomatics came in, as Herman did at the very beginning, with mind and body, as the work has expanded to where it is now, numerology is such a huge component because it is about the vibration. And even today, with all of us here today, we're all resonating. The fact that Linda, and thank you for being here, is bringing that aspect. And because I know Linda's numbers, she's doing such an amazing job with, and I love all aspects of this work. And for me as a teacher, then had to stop, and I chose to stop because there was other aspects of my lifestyle that between grandchildren growing, I was able to influence them based on me not necessarily teaching, but living this work. That foot point wasn't so much about me saying, hey, straighten up your foot point. It was how to interact with them, saying that they either were looking for support or self-absorbed in their own aspect. And this work is so illuminating. And you're right, for everyone who's speaking today, and Linda, again, that you're bringing so much awareness that I love coming to these meetings, because even for a veteran as myself, there's always another aspect that's, whoa, yeah, that is so still important, or never thought of it that way. So thank you very much for including me.
Thank you. And I'd like to invite Lou as well. Lou, do you have anything that you'd like to add or share?
Well, really, thank you, Linda. On the back of what Cynthia was saying, most of us are in the human domain of also being responsible for the direction that our own thinking, our own physicality, they're our responsibility. Most of us are still, I mean, one of the great things about doing psychosomatics was that when somebody else was unraveling in front of me and beginning to identify themselves, I was able to see how that also healed me, and or in some way, maybe not in exactly the same way, because of the uniqueness of each individual's blueprint. But from my point of view, the strongest reason to keep coming, despite my long association with psychosomatics, is that people say, heal thyself, healer. People say, those that are psychologists, work with your psychology, because when you're with yourself, there are levels of denial that won't be accessed another way than when you interact with others in this mind-body connection. And just notice, like when you were talking about the breathing, Linda, it was just so beautiful to be able to notice, yeah, conscious thought allows for also access, consciously bringing awareness to different parts of the body that otherwise I would forget. And just exactly the same as right now, I'm in Tasmania, Australia. Only a few weeks ago, I was in Washington State in the US. And like, where does it go when I'm not there witnessing it or being conscious of it, being a part of it? And then where does Tasmania go when I'm there? It's just like, yeah, the space is so profound, so deep, so big, and conscious thought or conscious being allows for present moment awareness for me. So thank you very much. And I mean, the meetings are so so it's such a generous space to hold, Linda, because the meetings are so diverse. Like the different presentations that I have seen through my students, through my clients, through my friends, through my kids, the different, however much I let them close to me, they are still only my response to them. They're still like, I'll never forget the type of wording that Herman used to use with me. Do you love your kids? And I'd say, yeah, every part of everything. And he said, I don't believe you. You are loving your response to them, and just keep looking. So my exploration is always to keep looking. And thank you for including me in your conversation. Wonderful.
Lou, absolute pleasure. And thank you for everyone that shared, Lee as well, Cynthia, Mara. You made me, it just jogged my mind as well, Lou, that the judgment. When I first started doing this work, one of the questions that people were asking is like, you must be so judgmental now that you can see all these things. And it was really interesting because what I noticed was when I first did the training as a student, I noticed that my own internal judgment was being reflected in what I thought I heard from others, and so loudly. So I actually had projected a lot of my internal judgment onto hearing a tone of voice, a random comment that may not have been as sensitive as what it could have been. And I also did learn with my numbers about the sensitivity that I actually do have with the 3. You know, once upon a time, standing up and in front of a class and saying my name in front of a group of colleagues would have been terrifying for me. My face would have gone red and I would have been tongue-tied. So this has been, for me, the evolution of the number of 3 has been fantastic. But there's something really special that happens with learning how to read other people. You actually start to see, oh, that person didn't mean to be rude. They weren't attempting to offend me. They just maybe lack a little bit of sensitivity. May not have been something that they've experienced. So the world of compassion opens up in such a profoundly different way with psychosomatics. That I truly think that that's a gift that anyone who's had any experience of psychosomatics really holds that space of seeing without necessarily creating any form of judgment. The other thing I wanted to share with you, I'm just disappeared for 1 second. If you do want to know more about psychosomatics, we will be sending you all a email. It will have links to different courses. Christy, Sean, and myself. Christy and Sean couldn't be here today, but they send their love, and we're all doing an online psychosomatic training together. So that's 66 hours online. The invitation is then to go into face-to-face, or you can do individual modules. Our next training is currently taking place in February next year, so still some time away. Some people may choose to do individual modules, face reading, hand reading, foot reading, and then go into one of the other trainings. They're all standalone. So if you only do face, or if you only do feet, they're designed to be standalone, but they're all encompassing with the full psychosomatic program. So one leads into the next for those that might want to go further. There are a couple of psychosomatic therapy trainings occurring as well. Christy has one in America coming up, and we'll send you details. Christy's website is christyfoster.co, and mine is thefaceandbodyinterpreter.com. So that being said, I know there's a couple of you need to leave. Are there any questions that anybody would like to ask? And is there anything else that anyone would like to share, either from a client perspective, student perspective, teacher perspective? So I just put the invitation out there. We did have one question about feet, because we've mentioned feet point a few times. So the ideal foot point is, if you have your 2 feet like this, you need to make room for an extra foot in the middle. And the foot point needs to be straight. So what we're looking at is that your ankle, your knee, your hip are in alignment with each other. And that needs to be in alignment from both front view as well as side view. Many people will have the alignment when you look at them straight on, but when you look at them side on, you'll notice that the knees are locked and most of their body is forward. If the majority of the body is forward, or even if 60% is forward and 40% behind, and what I'm referring to here is a plumb line that starts at just in front of the ankle. If you've got your body forward, you are ahead of yourself. Your sensory awareness is out into the public arena rather than positioned nicely over your body. And what we tend to find is that is exactly what occurs for a lot of people. They're so intent of being concerned about how safe they feel in the world that their attention is outside of themselves. And that's all part of the psychosomatic awareness. Okay, everyone, I hope you have a lovely month. We'll let you know the topic for the next month. And thank you for joining us. Lee, massive thanks to you. Mara, thank you. Cynthia and Lou and Linda as well, sharing too. And to everyone else who's turned up or listening to this recording. Thank you.
Thank you.